All right, music fans, welcome back. It is I, Dave, the real music observer, observing real music in real time for real people just like you right there and me right here. In this video, I'm going to try to explain why I believe Don Felder actually had more of an impact on the Eagles' sound than Joe Walsh did. First of all, Felder joins the band earlier than Walsh. He's the guy who can quickly just pluck those strings on his guitar and gets the nickname Fingers Felder. Uh, he's first brought in on a tune called Good Day in Hell to see if he can actually play, and he puts down some tasty slide guitar, and Glenn Frey calls him the next day and says, "Hey, welcome to the band." Now, as time rolls on, Frey and Ledden, Bernie Ledden, original member Bernie, who doesn't play a real hard style lead guitar. He's more into bluegrass and acoustic instruments, and as time goes by, it appears that the Eagles want to rock out even more. Now, they have Felder in the band, who is fairly close to Bernie Ledden because they kind of grew up together and played in bands and stuff. And then the Eagles more or less say, hey, we want Joe Walsh in the band, and we want Bernie Ledden out after one of these nights. Now, by the time we get to one of these nights, we're still pretty much an acoustic band, but on the title track, Don Felder just absolutely nails and smokes the guitar solo. Very precise, fantastic solo, and one of the reasons these guys brought him in the first place. I mean, this is why they brought him in. Now, to bring Walsh in, Walsh had done a lot of pretty rockin' projects. If you look at his album So What, for instance, which wasn't too much prior to when they wanted to bring him in, that's a great rock and roll album, and it contains some things as far as the music, the style of music. It's just killer hard rock tunes like County Fair and Turn to Stone. Of course, then you've got more Eagles like tunes like Help Me Through the Night, which, by the way, the song features both Glenn and Don singing harmony vocals, maybe Randy too. I'm not 100% on that, but it's kind of an Eagles style tune. But Walsh, if you look at things like Rocky Mountain Way and his work with the James Gang, you would think that he was going to bring a much edgier sound to the Eagles. Well, the two songs that Walsh brings during his tenure are Pretty Maids in a Row and In the City. Now, neither track is, an all-out rocker. I know on Hotel they were trying to write around the concept of Hotel California and this melancholy, California indulgence and decadence that the country was. I don't think the mid-'70s were a very decadent time for the country, but according to Don Henley, they were, and thus everything had to be written about this dark underbelly of Americana that's slowly being eaten away over time, and that's what Hotel California ends up being about, even though for the average listener they have no clue as to what it's really about. We had to be told, and then we continue to ask questions because we're still not convinced. Now, Walsh didn't bring much to the table when it came to the rest of the album. It was Frey, Henley, Felder writes the body of Hotel California and Victim of Love as far as the music goes. And on Life in the Fast Lane, it's kind of a duel between Walsh and Felder. Walsh brings a part, Felder brings a part. Walsh may have contributed a little bit more, and some folks may say that's the tune that kind of defined sort of this bad boy Eagles image. And that may be true, but it was definitely a collaboration rather than, hey, I've got this song. Now, In the City was a tune that Walsh had already done for a soundtrack, and they recycled it and they put it on the Long Run. And it's a mid-tempo rocker, sounds like an Eagles track. It's got some tasty slide guitar in there, and I know Felder probably helped on that track, getting it a little more, shall we say, rockable. I don't know if that's even a word, but look at Joe Walsh's material prior to the Eagles, and then he kind of continues on, even on But Seriously, which is the big album for Joe Walsh because of Life's Been Good. That's the epic party. The Eagles didn't want the party. They didn't want the monster tones. What they wanted was more serious stuff. And Walsh was kind of like a little too goofy, a little having a little bit too much fun for the Eagles. Where I think Felder was a guy who would say, "Hey, how can I make your song better? How can I help you, compose a music bed, and then you guys come up with some great lyrics for it?" That's what happened with Hotel, and it happened again on things like Those Shoes, which is a pretty decent rock tune off of The Long Run. Later, when the Eagles disband, Walsh again, he's doing like Life of Illusion, and not that the stuff isn't rocking, but it's not the turbocharged stuff that defined his earlier work, except on one track called The Confessor, which I have to say is just an amazing sort of two-part guitar blast. If you haven't heard The Confessor, you really need to go listen to it. Other than that, you've got goofy stuff like Ordinary Average Guy and In My Car. Got Any Gum? You've got that as an album title. And I love Joe Walsh, by the way. I have no problem with Joe Walsh, but I don't know. He brings this somewhat fun and not so serious side, and I think the Eagles needed more cohesion, more direction, and they needed a guy that kind of contributed but also complemented what they were doing rather than just pulling them in his direction. And I think that's what Felder did. If you look at Felder's solo album that came out not too far after that, the tunes have a dark edge to them. Look at the stuff that was on the heavy metal soundtrack, whether it's All of You or Taking a Ride on Heavy Metal. I think Felder had this reserve of sort of dark nighttime driving music. What he needed was a Henley or a Fry to be there to write some more lyrics and possibly sing. Don Felder sings okay, as we know. I think he sang great on those tunes from his first album and from the heavy metal soundtrack. But what I'm really liking about what Don Felder does is he creates these musical landscapes that are dark and that they have sort of this aura about them that if you had a collaboration rather than just this solo effort, I think it would have been gold for the band. I think the band would have created some great music during the 1980s, but they missed a huge opportunity because of the fight over in Long Beach and the fact that Don Henley and Glenn Frey weren't getting along. That's the big secret, that a lot of folks just blame Felder for the breakup, but it was really Henley and Frey who were at odds with one another and needed a break. So that's my hypothesis. If you look at the solo material of both of these artists, Walsh just never lived up to that stuff that he was doing prior to when he got in the Eagles. And the Eagles were such control freaks that they weren't going to let, the barnstorm Joe Walsh take over and really rock it out. They wanted some rock street cred, but for the most part, Hotel California is a fairly easy to listen to album. Long Run, not too much behind that. There are a couple of moments on side 2, and then Heartache Tonight, which is a stomper, but it's still pretty easy to listen to. It's kind of like listening to, old-time rock and roll by Bob Seger. And Seger, of course, co-wrote Heartache Tonight. So that's just my hypothesis. I do believe Felder brought more atmosphere and more sort of technical things to the table than Joe Walsh did. They're both excellent musicians. I just think the Eagles originally had this goal of bringing Walsh in to be this, guitar hero, and it turns out that they already had one, and they probably didn't even need to have another one. So that's it. I'm done with this video. I'm Dave, and I will chat again soon.